Good afternoon. Let us come to order and go on the record. I'm Tanola D. Brown Bland, the presiding commissioner for this hearing, and with me this afternoon are Chair Charlotte A. Mitchell, Commissioners Daniel G. Clodfelter, Kimberly W. Duffley, Floyd B. McKissick Jr., and Karen M. Camerate. Commissioner Jeffrey A. Hughes is also with us by remote conference using the WebEx platform. I now call for oral argument, docket number W-218, sub 526A, in the matter of application by Aqua, North Carolina, Inc., for approval of annual adjustment to conservation pilot program revenue reconciliation charge or credit. On February 14th, 2022, Aqua, North Carolina, Inc., hereafter Aqua, filed a conservation pilot program annual reconciliation request pursuant to the Commission's order approving partial settlement agreement and stipulation, deciding contested issues, granting partial rate increase, and requiring customer notice, issued on October 26, 2020, in docket number W-218 sub 526, hereafter the sub 526 rate case. On April 1st, 2022, the public staff filed a notice of its plan to present comments and recommendations at the Commission's April 18th, 2022 regular staff conference. On April 8th, 2022, Aqua filed a response to the public staff's notice and asserted that the calculations proposed in the public staff's notice are inconsistent with the Commission's finding in the sub 526 rate case that a revenue reconciliation process as set forth by the company is integral to the pilot program. In its response, Aqua agreed with the public staff's recommendation that the refund be made a one-time bill credit to all affected pilot customers as opposed to over a period of 9 to 12 months as originally foreseen by the company. Aqua asserted that this concession by the company mitigates and offsets any need for the Commission to require the accrual of interest as recommended by the public staff. Aqua requests that if the Commission imposes an interest charge, it use a rate of 6.81%, which is the company's current overall rate of return. Finally, Aqua requested that the Commission rule that any interest imposed in this current proceeding for the refund be the rate that would be applied to any future customer surcharges resulting from future revenue under recoveries. The public staff had planned to present this matter to the Commission at its April 18th, 2022 staff conference. However, at the request of the Commission, this matter was removed from the staff conference agenda to allow both parties to provide verified written responses to Commission's questions. On May 4th, 2022, the Commission issued an order directing the parties to file verified responses to 9 specific questions relating to the Conservation Pilot Program annual reconciliation request. And this matter was scheduled for oral argument today, May 16th at 2:00 p.m. On May 11th, both Aqua and the public staff filed responses to the Commission's questions. And on May 12th, 2022, Aqua filed the amended affidavits of Dean R. Gerhardt. On May 11th, the public staff filed a motion requesting that technical experts be allowed to participate at the oral argument. And on May 12th, 2022, that motion was allowed by Commission order. So today we are here for oral argument on the outstanding issues regarding revenue reconciliation as it pertains to the Conservation Pilot Program approved in the sub 526 rate case. In compliance with the State Ethics Act, I remind all members of the Commission of our duty to avoid conflicts of interest, and I inquire at this time as to whether any member has any known conflict with respect to the matter before us this afternoon. Let the record reflect that no conflicts were identified. I'll now call upon counsel for appearance.
David Drews, appearing on behalf of Aqua, North Carolina.
Good afternoon, Mr. Drews.
Megan Yost with the public staff. We represent the Using and Consuming public. With me pursuant to the Commission's order allowing expert witness participation is Charles Junis, Director of the Public Staff's Water, Sewer, and Telephone Division.
And good afternoon to you both. All right. Are there any matters that need to be brought to the commission's attention before we begin?
I had one question. Assuming Aqua is the party with the burden of proof, do we get to go first and last?
That's exactly what I am going to suggest and allow.
Thank you.
So you were ahead of me. We will go ahead with the oral argument. We will begin with counsel for Aqua. We would ask that you please be judicious. At this point, the commission has read as well as been briefed on the filings. So the quick way to say it is we believe you can cut to the chase, and I think you will be able to do it in short order. The commission does have a few questions, and we may come up with some more. As the more you talk, the more questions we may have. All right. So hopefully we can keep time to a minimum. And it's our preference that as you proceed with your arguments, that you do so in a manner that does not require us to clear the hearing room and or go off of the live stream. But if you do need to get into something you feel is confidential, we request that you bring it to our attention promptly so we can deal appropriately. If there's nothing else, I think I covered it all. We'll start with, we'll hear from Aqua. We do ask, because we are on camera, that anyone who is speaking come up to the witness stand position.
Mr. Becker will be joining me as well as Mr. Gearhart on video, so we'll both come up.
And just be sure you bring the mics up as close as you can, because we want to make sure that Commissioner Hughes as well as witness Gearhart can hear. It's mighty tempting to put you under oath, but that's not why we're here today, so we won't do that.
Commissioners, my name is David Drews, again, appearing on behalf of Aqua, North Carolina. I'm going to speak to the revenue reconciliation issue primarily from the legal side. And if there's technical questions, Mr. Becker and Mr. Gearhart can respond. Up front, I want to say that the company has undergone a number of corrections in its calculation from its February 14th filing to its April 8th filing to the May 11th filing. And a number of those were in response to errors caught by the public staff and commission, which we, in retrospect, appreciate. I believe with the May 11th filing, the company has sorted out the errors and now has a reasonable recommendation before the commission. The primary contested issue in this case is whether to true up or do the reconciliation based on average usage per customer or on the total revenue requirement. This arises because the company did experience a higher level of revenues from the pilot areas than was anticipated in the rate case. So refunds due. There's two reasons why those revenues in 2021 were higher. The first is because the average usage per customer was greater than anticipated. And the second is because there was customer growth on those subdivisions or systems. So as you know, Aqua proposes the reconciliation based on the average usage per customer. And the public staff is recommending a cap on the revenue requirement to hold it to what was approved in the rate case. This issue, in our opinion, was already decided in the sub 526 rate case order. In that case, Aqua witness Phil proposed a reconciliation based on average per customer usage. That's throughout his pre-filed testimony and in the commission's order. If you want any sites, just let me know. But the sub 526 rate case order, finding fact number 44, approved a reconciliation process, quote, as set forth by the company, close quote. And that process was on the basis of average per customer usage. So that essentially settled that issue in our mind. The methodology to be used appears in a couple of places. One, it was in the narrative testimony pre-filed of witness Phil, and that was copied into the commission's order, and it's what we have inserted in the May 11th filing as well, where we put the dollars next to that description of how the reconciliation method should work. And that comes out to the $102,226 figure that the company recommends. Again, the order concluded that the method proposed by the company should be accepted. There was also Phil Exhibit 4, which has been raised at and discussed at some length by the public staff. That was intended to illustrate particular scenarios, hypothetical scenarios that might arise under the methodology. It was not intended to encompass every potential scenario. In fact, if you start contemplating different amounts of over and under conservation instead of just the 1% in that exhibit, if you contemplate increases at different levels of customer growth, which was not an assumption in that exhibit, you could have thousands of scenarios. The 3 scenarios in that exhibit were illustrative, not comprehensive. And I think that was clear in his testimony and in the commission's order. So the public staff did not file any exceptions to the commission's order. They did not appeal the order with regard to this conservation pilot reconciliation method. And to date, they have not cited any compelling reasons for reconsideration of that order. In that circumstance, it's the company's belief that the legal doctrine of issue preclusion applies here. The public staff should be collaterally stopped from raising again an issue they previously contested and lost in the rate case. I would also like to note that the reconciliation method proposed by the company is consistent with North Carolina General Statute 62-133.12a. That statute allows a true-up mechanism for water and sewer companies based on the average usage per customer, which is exactly what the company has done. In contrast, the public staff position of capping revenues at the level set in the rate case would be retroactive rate making. There's no rate case mechanism or statutory authority for a cap on total revenues in the pilot areas. Third point I'd like to make here is the Aqua position is better regulatory policy. Reconciliation based on the average per customer usage adjust for over and under recovery of revenues resulting from the difference between the predicted customer usage in the rate case and the actual customer usage from the conservation rates. It's thus specific to the conservation pilot. In contrast, the public staff recommendation would refund revenues from customer growth, which is unrelated to the conservation pilot, or at least the unrelated to conservation rates. The public staff approach would violate the regulatory principle of matching revenues to expenses. It would leave Aqua with all the cost of adding new customers, and there is necessarily a cost when you add customers, with none of the revenues from adding those customers. Be blunt, the public staff recommendation is effectively a conservation rate killer. And I say that because the mismatch of revenues to expenses that would result would lower the company's rate of return. And no utility that has customer growth is going to want conservation rates under that method. There are also, moving on to kind of the minor issues in this reconciliation. One issue is whether and how much of an interest rate should be applied to the refund that Aqua will be paying to customers. And in its filings, the company had proposed 0, and then as a backup plan had proposed their authorized rate of return of 6.81%. At this time, the company is withdrawing its 0% proposal and recommending solely that the interest rate on refunds be the 6.81% authorized rate of return. That's within the commission's authority under 62-130E. And we believe it's a fairer and more appropriate rate than the 10% suggested by the public staff, because the company under 6.81% is not forced to pay a higher rate on refunds than it is given the opportunity to earn. Another one of the minor issues raised in the public staff's May 11th filing is how many decimal points to round the excess rate to. The company had rounded at 2.7%. Public staff pointed out that in Phil's exhibit, he rounded out an additional decimal point. I think this is a rather marginal issue, but we'll speak to it quickly. Aqua acknowledges that that is a departure from the Exhibit 4 of Witness Phil. Aqua has no objection to changing its rounded 2.7 excess rate to 2.66%, as the public staff has suggested would be proper. However, that would reduce the amount that the company would be refunding to customers by about $1,500. So we'll leave that to the commission's discretion. The company doesn't care either way. Third issue raised in the May 11th filing of the public staff is the departure from Phil's recommendations of issuing a one-time refund. Witness Phil had recommended doing the refund over a period of 9 to 12 months. And yes, that is a departure from what was proposed in the rate case. We think it's reasonable. And there actually was something that was proposed to the company by the public staff, and we agreed to it. It gets the money back to the customers quicker, and it's a more efficient process for Aqua to follow. I just want to conclude here by saying that the approach of doing a reconciliation on the average per customer usage instead of capping the revenue requirement is appropriate, because that methodology proposed by Aqua is consistent with the statute 62-133.12a. It's consistent with the testimony of witness Phil in the rate case. It's consistent with the commission's order in the sub 526 rate case. And it's consistent with the principle of matching revenues to expenses. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Drews. Let me be sure. So you indicated if we go in terms of the interest rate to instead of rounding at the 1 decimal point, but to the 2 decimal points, that would be a reduced amount of refund, and that was in the amount of $1,500.
Yeah, yes, it's $1,514 and some cents, 17 cents, something like that.
Okay.
Insignificant amount over 7,000 some customers.
All right, thank you. And then in the beginning, you indicated there were two primary reasons that there was a refund due. in addition to that, might it be, or does the company have any information or any reason to believe that there was not a significant period of drought during this time period, and that may have affected the consumption?
Yes, I mean, that goes, and Mr. Becker may want to speak to that too, but I think that goes to the average usage per customer. So that average usage per customer can be affected by a lot of variables. The conservation rate is the one that was aimed at, but obviously drought and that sort of thing could affect it too. And that's one reason why it's good to have the pilot run, not just for 1 year, but over 2 or 3 years.
All right, it is not the primary focus of this inquiry, but I do believe the commission is interested to know what insight we have at this moment as to why we're in the situation where a refund is due, with regard to how well, any conclusions that can be drawn about how well or not well the conservation pilot is operating at this point.
Sure.
So,
Thank you, Commissioner Brownbland. I didn't look at any statistics on the drought information as to whether or not the weather preceded some behavior and consumption. That's the reason we do an average consumption. That's why we suggested using an average consumption per customer to do this true up, though, is because we do get those seasonal fluctuations, hurricanes or whatever. It depends if it happens during irrigation season, primarily during the summer. I will say we've only had 1 year of detailed records under our belt to really look at, so it's hard to compare. My belief, my personal belief, is that when we had the conservation rates applied, we did notice the customers. We tried to put advance notice in so we could affect their behavior. Right, we wanted them to conserve so that we wouldn't run into capacity issues and other things, other operational problems. I don't believe that they saw the impact in the bills that dictated the behavior to say, I need to start reducing my consumption because it's costing me money. We did try to send out notices in advance saying, here's what would happen. I think it gave a couple examples. On average consumption, if you use this and then you use this, here's what your bill would look like, to provide that awareness. But that elasticity that we talked about in the last rate case, I think it was for a 10% increase in the average cost of a bill, you get about I want to say a 3% or a 0.3% reduction in consumption. So we anticipated that there would be some reduction, but I think that behavior takes a little bit of time. When you see that affect your bill and your monthly bills, that you're not going to necessarily have the time to correspond to reduce your consumption to make it reduce. So I just don't think we've seen it long enough in place.
So at the risk of speaking for the company without consulting with them, I might offer up that before the company recommends making conservation rates permanent or eliminating them or modifying them, that it file an analysis of the effect that it has observed in the pilot.
I think we'll be expecting that when the time comes. All right. Another question that we have for you is, does the pilot program reconciliation process work in the same manner if the pilot program customers had conserved and used less water than factored into the rate case usage revenue? Would there be any difference in the manner in which Aqua would recommend the surcharge to customers be calculated?
As I look at that narrative in Phil's testimony and in the rate case order, I believe it works both ways, whether there's under or over conservation. I don't know if Mr.
And I would confirm that. In discussions when we were putting this together, we had no intent of having growth included in these reconciliations, so it would have gone both ways. If they under-conserved, or if we over-collected, we're going to give that credit back. If we under-collected, we were going to do a surcharge using the same principles. It was not an absolute total revenue during the rate case. Total revenue collected as of a certain point in time, subtracted to, the examples that Phil put together, use the average consumption. There'd be no need to put those examples together using average consumption if all you need is a total revenue requirement minus total actual revenues as of a certain date.
All right. Do any commissioners have questions for the company? Oh, good. We're moving along. So thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
gentlemen. Oh, excuse me. Did I look at my colleague, Commissioner Hughes? Did you have any questions? No questions. All right, thank you. All right, Ms. Yes, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Again, I'm Megan Yost with Public Staff. In the W-218 sub 526 rate case, the commission approved a revenue reconciliation process that was intended to assure that the company would receive its full authorized revenue requirement, no more and no less. This fundamental purpose of the reconciliation process appears in Aqua witness Edward Thill's pre-filed direct testimony and in the commission's proposed order, and it was also, the company's proposed order, and it was also incorporated into the commission's findings of fact in its final rate case order. We appear before you today because the company calculated the reconciliation request it filed on February 14th in a manner that is inconsistent with both the company's stated purpose of the reconciliation process and with the methodology set out in witness Thill's revised Direct Exhibit 4 to achieve that purpose. In its response to the public staff's April 1st, 2022 notice, the company stated that its reconciliation request was, quote, entirely consistent with witness Thill's testimony describing the company's methodology for calculating the revenue reconciliation, which is illustrated in Thill Revised Direct Exhibit 4. This is not the case, however. The company used different values to calculate the revenue reconciliation in its reconciliation request than were used in Thill Revised Direct Exhibit 4. Specifically, instead of multiplying the revenue requirement by the percentage difference in average bill amount to produce the revenue deficit or excess, as was done in witness Thill's exhibit, the company multiplied the actual bill count by the difference in average bill amount. Instead of acknowledging this change in its responses to the commission's questions, the company characterized this change as a math error. Another inconsistency relates to the basis for the company's revenue reconciliation calculation. In scenario 1 of witness Thill's revised Direct Exhibit 4, the total usage and bill counts remain the same, resulting in no variation between the rate design and actual average usage per customer. Even though the rate design and actual average usage per customer were exactly the same, scenario 1 of witness Thill's exhibit shows a surcharge to reconcile actual revenue, which was lower due to a shift in usage between rate blocks to the revenue requirement. This shows that the company's revenue reconciliation methodology is not based on average usage per customer, which the company claims is in agreement with Section 62-133.12a of the North Carolina General Statutes, the testimony of witness Thill, and the sub 526 rate case order. Rather, it is based on the average revenue per bill as shown in Thill Revised Direct Exhibit 4 and the company's reconciliation request. Yet another inconsistency between the company's reconciliation request and the methodology it advocated in the sub 526 rate case relates to customer growth. Witness Thill testified during the sub 526 rate case that growth should not be included in the revenue reconciliation. Further, witness Thill's revised Direct Exhibit 4 shows 3 scenarios in which growth is not incorporated and the actual revenue is always reconciled to the revenue requirement, thereby functioning as revenue cap. Contrary to witness Thill's testimony and exhibit, the company's reconciliation request incorporates growth in the actual bill count. By including growth, instead of reconciling 100% of the difference between the actual revenue and the revenue requirement, the company retains a significant portion of that difference. As I've explained, the company's reconciliation request is inconsistent with the reconciliation process's purpose of assuring that the company receives its full authorized revenue requirement, no more and no less. The result of this inconsistency, which is demonstrated by the company's reconciliation request, is that the company is not only protected from risk, but is also essentially guaranteed to collect revenues in excess of the authorized revenue requirement through the incorporation of growth. Thus, as implemented by the company, the reconciliation process has become a mechanism to assure that the company receives no less than its authorized revenue requirement. By approving the public staff's recommended revenue reconciliation, the Commission would implement a revenue reconciliation that accomplishes the stated purpose that the company be allowed to recover the full authorized revenue requirement, no more, no less, and is consistent with the results produced by all three of the scenarios set out in the Revised Direct Exhibit 4. This concludes my statement, but Mr. Junis and I are available to respond to any questions from the Commission. Thank you.
Any other questions from the commissioners? Is that a hand, Commissioner Hughes?
Yes. Yeah, just a quick question on one of the comments that you made at the end. Is my audio okay? Yep, good. The comment about the growth leading to increased revenue requirements from what was authorized, wouldn't that occur no matter what if there was growth, significant growth in the area? Don't we often see revenue requirements go up from what was authorized? And that's the fundamental way that we do rates, by using a backward test year?
I'm going to defer that to Mr. Junis.
So I would say if you're capturing growth within a rate case, yes, like if it's an end of period, you would adjust, and then a lot of times that end of period adjustment will be made as a growth factor adjustment that only applies to the variable expenses. So usually it's the DFC is clearly stated as part of the reports that were given that revenue exceeds the cost. And I think that here, when dealing with a revenue reconciliation, is sort of part of the trade-off. If you're going to have this protection that you're going to get the revenue requirement no more and no less, the trade-off is that potential additional revenue.
And following up on that, when you're talking about, I think you just said get, does the fact that this is a pilot project and we all knew that there was some risk going into it, and sort of a concept of spreading risk and how much risk is fair, does that play at all into your thinking about revenue requirements and reconciliation?
Yes,
just from the risk sharing standpoint. I mean, Aqua didn't, so that's it.
Right. I think if this doesn't function as a true revenue requirement reconciliation, that then a pilot becomes actually more lucrative to the company than its normal rate structure. And I don't think there was any consideration of that potential reduced risk to a significant customer base.
Do you think if this wasn't a pilot project and there wasn't a decoupling mechanism approved in the rate order, just under normal circumstances, something unusual happened and there was, a little bit of growth beyond what was expected, but just under a normal rate case, we wouldn't be here, right? I mean, there would be no risk. So it seems like Aqua is giving up some normal potential rate treatment because they did a pilot project. And I mean, is that kind of the risk that we want them to carry up, is to actually give up a kind of essential part of rate making?
So I think that really goes to how this mechanism was portrayed. When it was talked about, the company consistently said no growth. Well, we've seen clearly there's growth involved here. And then the illustrations that they rely on, because it does not include growth, I think we have all been sort of portrayed sort of a non-applicable examples. That if growth was a expected reality, why wasn't growth put into those exhibits? Why wasn't growth discussed by Bill? His testimony is clear. Does the revenue reconciliation include growth? No. That is his direct testimony. He never refutes that. But now we're talking about 1,500 more bills, projecting actually 3,600 more bills. That's about $170,000 in terms of additional projected revenues from growth. You know, if the company wanted to sort of bank on balancing that risk and getting the benefit of growth, then they shouldn't have sought a reconciliation. But they wanted to reduce their risk from reduced consumption, which is the intent of this rate structure. And I think that was a trade-off. Otherwise, like I said, this becomes actually a no-risk proposition and its most lucrative rate structure.
No further questions. Thanks, Mr. Jones.
Chair Mitchell.
All right, I have a couple for y'all. All right, Mr. Junis. I think I heard you say, now make sure I heard it correctly. I think I heard you say just a minute ago in response to Commissioner Hughes, the pilot becomes more lucrative than the base rates under the scenario, under the structure as the company has proposed it. Did I hear that? Did I hear you say that correctly?
And maybe I got a little carried away with more lucrative, but they are certainly protected from the risk side.
And I understand that.
So when you're balancing that proposition, under this current scenario, no, they're not going to make more than their other customer bases. But if you do get into the higher tiers, there is that potential. And then again, you have reduced the downside of reduced consumption, which has been the claims and trends of recent rate cases. So I think that's significant to offset that.
Okay, and I follow your points you're making about the company's reducing its risk, and that should go both ways. I think I understand the point that you're making there. But is it not premature to say, I mean, we've only seen a year's worth of data from this program, from the implementation of this rate design. So it's going to go another year or two, and so we'll have more data. I just wonder, is it premature to come to a conclusion about, you know, whether this rate design is more, I'm using your words, more lucrative? I understand you might have gone too far there,
Right.
But
in terms of lucrative, I'm really getting at the balance of risk, that they basically have zero risk and are now guaranteed a revenue requirement per bill as they have proposed.
But
that's extraordinary in comparison to if consumption trends are going down, then you would have expected that was a significant risk that was being avoided. But you know, this is a business model based around growth, and so it's surprising to have a basis for a decision that said no growth, and now all of a sudden it be incorporated and have significant dollar amounts tied to it. But I don't think you want to make any conclusions about the conservation rates. I think there is some caution of, is it weather? Is it the effectiveness of the conservation rates? Is it potentially sort of the socioeconomic status of these customers? We are very aware of systems that Aqua has and others that people don't care how much they pay. You know, they demand that you provide as much water as they want. If they want to run their sprinkler 24/7, then you provide that amount of water at any cost. There are literally systems that demand an elevated storage tank So then they can water their yard 24/7.
Yeah, well, I don't, I guess my question here really is, goes to the intent of this rate design. Isn't the intent of the rate design to encourage customer behavior? And as part of this program, there is the piece that mitigates risk to the company of under recovery. But ultimately, we're asking the company to sell, to work to sell fewer gallons of water than it otherwise would. And so, I mean, I just help me explain to me, in light of that, in light of what may be the intent of the program here, why is the two-way mitigation
So
unfair?
to that point, if you are not going to tie back to that revenue requirement was determined in the public interest. If customers use less, then shouldn't Aqua's costs have gone down? If the claim is if they use more and you have more customers, then their costs are going to go up. Well, on the flip side, if they use less, their costs, their variable expenses should go down, right? But based on this mechanism, they are guaranteed a revenue requirement per bill, which I don't see anything in the order, nor have I seen an order where the commission approved a revenue requirement per bill. And I just want to add that this revenue requirement is just a portion of the uniform. It's not a cost of service specific to these customers. So I think that's sort of a factor here too, that this is an average cost of service.
All right, one last question for you. Walk me through what the public staff's position is here then. How would you return money to the customers? How much money would you return to the customers and justify that?
Okay. So as our stated position is, I think it's 208,000, and that includes 32,000 in base facility charge, and I think 175,000 in usage. That is a strict, here's the revenue requirement. How much did you go over? What's the difference? Return it over, a one-time payment to end of period customers. We are willing, as sort of a concession and to be reasonable, that Aqua would be allowed to retain the base facility charge. It's a portion of their cost of service. We think that, based on Phil's exhibit, he did not discuss base facility charges. So we're willing to do that. I think this is a matter of form versus function. You have a stated purpose. You have illustrations that show that purpose being implemented. Now you have the company wanting to sort of adhere to the form at the cost of the function or the purpose of this mechanism, at their benefit to retain that additional revenue. I think the form is, whatever the calculation, I mean, clearly they varied in their application and now have modified that and returned to a different calculation. The form is less important. The function is what it matters. We believe that the form that we have suggested properly implements the purpose or the function here.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Junis. I have nothing further.
So, Mr. Junis, that $208,130 that the public staff says should be refunded, that comes down to a one-time refund per customer of $29.48. Is that the number that you have? Per customer in the pilot program?
Yes, then we would apply the 4 months of interest, which I think comes to $30. Now, like I said, we're willing to concede here the BFC, which would then reduce that to 175,000 divided by the 7,059. end of period customers for a one-time credit. We still think interest is appropriate. We think interest in a similar light as the WIS-SIC, that's a one-way street, is also appropriate. That's a similar situation.
And so you heard the company indicate they prefer 6.81 interest rate. Is the public staff in agreement?
That would be different from the WIS-SIC. So I think our preference is 10%, but we could understand how the commission could end up at a 6.81%.
All right. A minute ago, you mentioned that if the water usage went down, it stood to reason that the company's cost would go down. Do you have a basis for that? I mean,
Absolutely. So, I mean,
well, wait, isn't
Oh,
it,
sorry.
isn't it still true that they have the same number of employees, the system doesn't change, et cetera? So where's it coming from that it would cost them less? Just in water purchase?
So variable expenses, you're dealing with purchase power, you're dealing with chemicals. And so just the same as the claim is additional customers have more costs, less usage. Well, not only additional customers, additional usage has an additional cost. The flip side is true that if you have less customers or less usage, the cost is lower.
So when we look at single issue rate making and retroactive rate making, isn't that why we hold all that off and look at that in the rate case?
I think that's appropriate in light of a reconciliation, right? We don't want to dive into a detailed, what are your actual costs in comparison to the revenues? We believe that the purpose was very clearly stated in how this would function, and that is a strict tie to the revenue requirement.
And then if the purpose of this conservation program is to get ultimately less water usage from the customers, doesn't refunding the customer growth revenues play a role in undercutting that purpose, that the more that's refunded back to those heavier users, the less they'll feel the impact of their own behavior?
So this is why we actually thought the one-time credit was more appropriate, because essentially you're going to get a huge difference in two bills. So you're going to get a bill that has a significant credit. So let's say you were normally at a $60 bill and then you get a 20 some odd dollar refund. Okay, that's noticeable. Then when you get your summer irrigation, because we were hoping this would be timed in the May timeframe, when you start getting into summer irrigation, say that June bill, all of a sudden that price signal is going to be a little more clear in the difference. But if you're just seeing, a small percentage increase, I don't think that's going to like click for people that, hey, this is costing me a significant amount more money if I water my lawn twice a week instead of every other week.
But aside from signals, because the refund would come kind of after the fact, the end result would be the heavier users would feel less of a impact from their own behavior.
Well, I think that's also the benefit of the one-time flat. They're not getting a similarly proportioned refund. So if you're a high user that has $500 monthly bills, you're still only getting $25 refund. So that's not going to be very noticeable in comparison.
All right, and then this is a question to clear up a piece of discussion from the original rate case. But if the pilot program is capped to the rate case revenue requirement, does that effectively refund all of the organic growth revenues within the pilot program service areas, or only a portion?
it would,
And I believe you and I had some discussion about a portion, and that's why I'm trying to,
yeah, so if consumption is down, then you could have growth sort of offset, and you might not need a surcharge. But we did talk about sort of the difficulties of incorporating growth into a trial, or a pilot, that, okay, these new customers, if they come in, they have a different set of assumptions. They haven't gotten Aqua bills for an extended period of time that would sort of train them to picking up on this price signal that, oh, well, last year I used that same amount of money and my bill was only $60. And now this month, this year it's $70 or $80. And so we talked about the difficulty of, would you sort of keep those customers separate? Could you argue that new customers should have just been charged the uniform rates and been exceptions to the pilot? Because they could, to some degree, muddy the results of the study group.
so you would argue here today that all the growth be refunded or a portion?
As it stands, yes, we are advocating for a strict reconciliation to the revenue requirement.
And the question that I asked the company, the method that you advocate for would be the same? Would it work the same way and be applied in the same way? Should there be under recovery?
So yes, if there's under recovery, either by decreases in consumption or loss of customers, we would be tying back to that revenue requirement. And that's sort of the piece that isn't a fair balancing. If you were trying to prevent the risk of losing customers to the risk or probability of gaining customers, those are not equal. It is very, very unlikely that they would lose customers on these systems, while it seems pretty likely, or very likely, that they were going to see some level of growth.
And finally, under what you advocate for in terms of how the reconciliation should go, do you understand is the same way as the company that would encourage or discourage conservation?
I don't think it discourage it. I think they were talking about it from the utility perspective.
Exactly. I was going to correct myself, but
And
same thing. Do you see it from that business perspective as a killer to conservation programs?
This is a pilot. It is a limited scope, limited time frame, and it is an experiment. So I don't think it is determinative one way or the other.
All right. Thank you for that. Chair Mitchell?
Just want to make sure I'm clear. So the public staff is advocating for a refund of the difference between the anticipated and the actual collections. But in your filings, the public staff has indicated a refund of about 200,000, 208,000. Is that right? But then I heard you say today you all would support or be okay with the companies keeping the basic facilities charge, the revenue attributable to the basic facilities charge. Is that right? I just want to make sure I understand what the public staff's position is.
That's correct. So it's about $32,000 that is tied to those additional customers.
And that's the basic facilities charge for those additional for the new customers.
That's correct.
And so help me understand why. What's your basis there?
I mean, in all reality, I would rather it be the 208,000, but we're trying to come from sort of a point of concession or consensus building. And so we are willing to recognize that additional customers take additional bills. But again, if this were a rate case and you were adding customers sort of as an end of period update, you're not going to do a full cost of service study necessarily. You are probably looking at a growth factor adjustment that is only going to apply to the variable expenses. And I think we've heard the utilities say time and time again, typically more customers equals a sort of greater economies of scale. And so if you were to determine a revenue requirement per bill, I think you'd want to consider that as a factor instead of just saying, well, it's generally the revenue requirement divided by the number of bills and not consider additional customers being added especially if it's likely.
Just explain that last sentence to me, because hasn't the company included additional customers when they're doing their calculation? Help me, I'm not sure I understood your
Okay,
last point there.
So they use a revenue requirement per bill, which is just generally the revenue requirement divided by the number of bills issued. But if you were really going to consider a customer growth, then there should be, especially in an organic growth to a system like this, economies of scale gained. And so then that revenue requirement per bill would actually go down. But that's not happening here.
All right, Commissioner Hughes?
Just a quick follow-up on what I think I heard you say in response, that it's highly likely under, I guess, current circumstances or just maybe in your experience that water utilities are seeing customer growth, and it's much, I think you said much less or unlikely that they would not see growth. And is that sort of your assessment on just kind of circumstances in North Carolina with water utilities in a rate case? Are they almost always going to have growth after a rate case, or highly likely to have growth after a rate case?
I think we are definitely seeing a growth. I can't comment on every single utility or every situation, but it is certainly the sort of regulated utility model to have growth, especially after a rate case. Ideally, they would add as much growth as possible after a rate case because they recognize that is a way that they can make more money, especially in terms of organic growth. There's less customers to spread the cost of service across if they're not included. And so, yes, they want to grow.
So with that strong incentive and that expectation, just from pilot projects in general, this is a pilot project to try something new and innovative. We have a lot of things in a lot of different utilities we've talked about being innovative. There was a comment about encouraging versus discouraging pilots. If we put out a call and said, bring us your interesting ideas in the public good, but as a cost of doing a pilot project, you're going to have to forego revenue that would be dealing with customer growth. Do you think that sends us a pretty strong signal not to stick your hand up and say, we want to do a lot of different pilot projects?
So I don't want this to be indicative of sort of future pilots or experiments. To be clear, the public staff was against this pilot. I mean, that was our stated position in the rate case. We didn't think that it was well thought out. We didn't think it was a representative sample. We didn't think there was enough data being captured. I mean, to my point, the socioeconomic factors is important. If the people don't care how much they're spending on their water bill, then they're not going to change their usage patterns. And so we're trying to fix this so then it's not basically a moneymaker for the utility. We just want it to be fair and execute the purpose that was stated. The full authorized revenue requirement, no more and no less.
And I appreciate that, and you made your case, but I am really curious about fostering innovation. Is giving up growth, dampening someone's innovation?
I think it just depends on what the goal is. I think it is dependent on what is that innovation, and what are the likelihoods of the benefits to customers and the utility. I think in this case, how much benefit is there to the customers? We try to sort of call out or pull out information of, what is a sort of +1 cost of service of what are the increments of additional usage that would prompt additional infrastructure spending? What could be prevented if customers reduce their consumption to some threshold? Tell the customers what the benefit's going to be. That, okay, if you guys can cut your consumption by 100 gallons a month, then the company won't have to invest $1 million on your plant, and then that'll save you X dollars a month in a bill. None of that was presented. There was no cost benefit. This was a pilot with sort of a very limited development on what was actually going to happen in terms of benefits to both the customers and the utility. Sorry, I probably said too much and I've gone over my time.
No, I appreciate it. I don't want you to hurt your head too, with turning your neck too much anymore. So,
well, here, I'll turn this way now if you have more questions.
We'll end it here. No, thank you for that. I appreciate your response, and no further questions on my side. Thanks.
All right, Commissioner Cameron. Oh, he's clairvoyant there. All right, there's no further questions for the public staff, so.
All right, I just want to make sure, because
no further questions.
Commissioner Mitchell was very clear. The more I talk, the more questions I get, so just double checking.
I think I said that. I think it is born true. Mr. Drews, would the company like a brief rebuttal moment?
Yes, please.
Return to the witness stand. And you may begin when you're ready.
I'll try to be brief. It's after lunch. This isn't the best time to get into technical discussion.
And stay near the mic, please.
Is that better? So I think a lot of the public staff's argument hangs on finding fact number 33, which talks about, the company should receive through this reconciliation its authorized revenue requirement, no more, no less. That needs to be put in context. It is very much a distortion when you read that sentence by itself. If you're looking at statutes that are related, you do them in peri materia. If you look at transactional documents, you look at all four corners. Same with the commission order. You need to look at all parts of it. And it's very clear in the order that what is meant by receiving the revenue requirement here is on the average usage per customer. That's in the testimony, and it's in finding of fact 44. I would particularly direct your attention to page 123 of the rate case order, where it says, towards the bottom of that page, there's an explanation of the reason behind this reconciliation process. It says, quote, as a general matter of fairness, there must be a settlement process to ensure that neither the pilot customer group as a whole nor the company is unduly harmed or enriched by this program. This program is the conservation pilot. It is not the customer growth. Then the very next sentence is the intent of the revenue reconciliation is that the company should receive its full authorized revenue requirement, no more and no less. So you have to read those together to get a fair interpretation of the commission's order. And that's why, I appreciate the public staff's candor in saying they oppose this pilot in the rate case. Well, I think today we're hearing a relitigation of an issue that was settled in the rate case order. there was some talk about lower risk. Obviously, if companies' financial risk is lower, that's addressed in rate of return, not through a true-up mechanism. But I don't believe it is a lowered risk for a couple of reasons. One, this reconciliation operates both ways. It's designed to protect customers and the company. The second is there's, whether you do it average usage per customer or whether you do it in a total revenue requirement, either way, that true up is on revenues, it's not on cost. And the company's cost growing, if you do it on the total revenue requirement, you definitely get that mismatch. That is the hit on a company's rate of return because they're not allowed to recover the revenues that match with the increased cost. And that is why the public staff method would be a significant disincentive to doing conservation rates. That's really all I have here. Thank you.
All right, any questions from commissioners? All right, thank you, gentlemen. So I believe Mr. Gerhardt is free to resume to enjoy his time away. And also, at this point, I would ask that proposed orders be submitted by both sides 2 weeks from the day after the transcript is available. There's no objection to that. That will be so ordered. Is there anything else pertaining to this matter that the commission needs to hear at this moment?
None from the company.
And none from the public staff.
All right, so thank you all, and we will be adjourned.